7 years. 7 years of marriage, during which I truly believed I had stepped into a decent family and married a man who loved me with all his heart. I gave everything I had. I sacrificed money, my youth, and the best opportunities of my life to build this home, only to arrive at today, when the very man who once shared my pillow every night coldly threw divorce papers straight into my face. He kicked me out of the house at Rittenhouse Square, the house for which most of the construction money came from me. And more painful than anything else, my mother-in-law, the woman I once respected with all my heart, threw a torn cloth bag at my feet, accompanied by a cruel sentence. "Take your trash and go. Don't ever let me see your face again." But she had no idea that when I opened that bag, a horrifying secret would be exposed, a secret that would leave me completely numb and push the tragedy of my life in a direction no one could ever imagine. Hello. My name is Cameron DuPont, or rather, I used to be Cameron DuPont. Today, I want to tell you my story, a story of betrayal, of unbearable pain, but also a story about the strength of a woman when she is driven into a corner. The sound of Sterling's fountain pen tapping against the glass tabletop rang in my ears like a gunshot. Outside, a summer storm was howling across Philadelphia. Heavy raindrops slammed against the windows, cold and gloomy, exactly like my state of mind at that moment. I sat motionless on the expensive leather sofa. In front of me lay the divorce papers. Sterling's fresh signature sprawled across them, like a mockery of the 7 years I had spent as his wife. My throat tightened. I couldn't utter a single word. I looked at the man sitting across from me, the man I had loved since I was 20, the man for whom I had not hesitated to give up a promising career, choosing instead to become his strongest support. His face was still refined, still handsome as ever. But the look in his eyes was so unfamiliar that it sent a chill straight down my spine. He was no longer the husband who held me every night, whispering words of love. The man before me looked like a judge, an executioner, coldly discarding me like an old object that had lost its value. "Sign it." His voice was completely emotionless. I lowered my gaze to the lines on the paper. Everything blurred: divorce petition, petitioner, Sterling DuPont, reason, irreconcilable differences in personality and lifestyle, incompatible. After 7 years, now we were incompatible? "The house is in my name," Sterling continued, his tone flat, as if reading a contract. "The car as well. You came into this marriage with nothing, so you leave with nothing. Simple as that. As a gesture for the years we shared, I'll give you a sum of money, enough to rent a small room and start looking for a new job." Each sentence landed like an invisible knife, stabbing straight into my heart. I had contributed 2/3 of my savings to that house. The luxury car he was driving was a gift I had bought with my year-end bonus. And now he dared to say I was a freeloader? Why? My voice was hoarse, trembling. That single word was all I could manage. "Sterling, why are you doing this to me? What did I do wrong?" He curled his lips into a sneer, a look of contempt I had never seen before. "You didn't do anything wrong, Cameron. It's just that you no longer fit into my life." He stood up and straightened his designer tie. "Amani just got back from London. She's introduced me to new connections, new opportunities that can change my life. And in that world, there's no place for a frugal wife like you. So it was because of Amani. Amani, the younger sister I had once loved like my own flesh and blood. The one whose 4 years of studying abroad I had financed, draining my savings so she wouldn't have to suffer. And the first gift she brought back was this ruthless betrayal. Just then, the living room door flew open. Odessa DuPont, my mother-in-law, walked in. She was wearing silk pajamas, holding a fan, her expression calm, as if this were just an ordinary afternoon, not the moment her son's marriage was falling apart. She glanced at me, then at the divorce papers on the table. "What are you waiting for? Sign it!" Her shrill voice was filled with triumph. A barren woman like you is nothing but a waste of space. 7 years and you couldn't even give birth to a single heir. What are you still clinging to this place for? Her words were like a bucket of ice water thrown straight onto my deepest wound. Children were the greatest pain of my life. We had gone to see countless doctors. All of them said we were both healthy. It just wasn't the right time yet. Sterling had once held my hand and said he didn't care. It turned out it had all been a lie. I lifted my head to look at her, hoping for one last trace of humanity, but all I received was a cold stare. Don't call me mother. I don't have a useless daughter-in-law like you. My son has a brilliant future ahead of him. He needs a woman worthy of his status, someone who can give him children, not a burden who lives off others. I couldn't take it anymore. The resentment surged up. I jumped to my feet, tears streaming down my face. A burden? You're calling me a burden? Who paid most of the money for this house? Where did the money for Amani's education come from? Who took care of everyone when they were sick? I never complained, but that doesn't mean I did nothing. Odessa froze for a brief moment, then snorted with a mocking laugh. Nice speech. Where's the proof? The house papers are in my son's name. You gave the money willingly. Now you want it back? How shameless. She turned to Sterling. What are you standing there for? Throw her out. One more minute in this house and she dirties it. As if waiting for that signal, Sterling stepped forward and grabbed my arm tightly. A suitcase had already been packed and placed by the entrance. Get out! I've run out of patience with you. He shoved me outside. I fell hard onto the icy tiles of the porch. The rain poured down on my face like thousands of needles. I looked back inside the house, at the man who had once been my husband, at the mother-in-law I had once respected. Stranger's eyes, cruel and unfeeling. The heavy iron door began to close. At that moment, Odessa stepped out, holding a torn old cloth bag, the one I used to take to the market. She threw it at me. It landed beside a dirty puddle. Take your trash with you. Get out of my sight. The door slammed shut. I sat there, letting the rain soak me through, rainwater mixed with tears. I didn't know where to go. I had lost everything. But perhaps out of curiosity, or because of the last remaining spark of hope, I reached out and picked up the torn bag. I opened it, and what was inside took my breath away, opening an entirely new chapter of my life. But before I tell you what I found, I need to go back to the past, because only when you understand where we began will you truly see the cruelty of this betrayal. The storm had not yet ended. I huddled under the awning of a closed shop, shivering. The small suitcase lay beside me. In my hand was the torn bag, the only thing they had returned to me. How long had I been sitting there? I didn't know. Time seemed to stop. Only pain and emptiness remained, gnawing at my soul. Why? Why did everything turn out like this? What had I done to deserve such an ending? 7 years isn't long, but it's long enough for a woman to place her youth, her trust, and her hope into a marriage. I once thought I was the happiest woman alive when I married Sterling. When we met, he was just a young man from a small town in Pennsylvania, coming to Philadelphia to seek his fortune. He was sincere, warm, with a smile that made me believe everything would be okay. And I, fresh out of college, just beginning to run a small fashion boutique. Love came gently, naturally. Cameron, he once said, I don't have anything right now, but I promise I'll give you the best life. I won't let you suffer. I believed him. I believed in that love. We married in a simple wedding, no extravagance, no show. Just the blessings of family and friends. We lived in a rented apartment in Germantown, poor but happy. I remember mornings when he made coffee for me, nights sitting on the floor eating cheap pizza, dreaming about the future. The hugs and whispered words, I'm here. Everything will be okay. My shop grew, from one small store to a chain of 3 fashion boutiques. I shared everything with Sterling, income, plans, dreams. I wanted him to know we were a team. When my career stabilized, I stepped back to take care of the family. I wanted to be a wife in the truest sense. I also thought about his parents. They lived in an old, run-down house. I suggested building them a new one. I withdrew nearly $500,000, all my savings at the time, to build them a 3-story home. On the day it was completed, my mother-in-law held my hand and said, "Cameron, I never thought I'd live in such a beautiful house." I believe my kindness had been appreciated. Then came Amani. 4 years of studying abroad, monthly transfers of money. I gave up all luxuries so she could have a future. But I was wrong. Sterling changed. He came home late. He became irritable, distant. Amani returned, fashionable, arrogant, teaching me how to keep a husband. Then came the parties, the unfamiliar perfume, the shouting. "You're just being paranoid." And today he ended everything with a single sentence. "You no longer fit." 7 years, reduced to just 4 words. I looked at the torn bag in my hand and laughed bitterly. And then I opened it, and what I saw inside changed everything. If you think every tragedy ends when a woman is thrown out of her home in the rain, then you're mistaken. In the next part, I'll tell you what I found inside that trash bag, and why from that moment on, my life no longer belonged to Sterling DuPont. Don't go anywhere. This story has only just begun. My mother-in-law's letter felt like a breath of fresh air rushing straight into my chest, easing the suffocation while igniting something I thought I had lost: hope. I was no longer the miserable woman crouching in the rain. I had a goal, a plan, and most importantly, I had an ally. Someone strong, clear-headed, and dangerous in the smartest possible way. I carefully tucked the passbook, property documents, and the letter deep into the bottom of the torn cloth bag. I kept only the cheap phone my mother-in-law had prepared for me. I had to leave immediately. I needed a safe place to begin the play. The play Odessa had staged using her own honor as collateral. But I couldn't go to my mother's house yet. If Sterling and Amani became suspicious, the first place they would search would be my mother's home. I needed temporary shelter, somewhere they would never think to look. And then I remembered Shayla. Shayla was a woman I had once helped when she first came to Philadelphia to start her career. She lived alone in a small apartment in Germantown, far from downtown and completely outside my social circle. Ordinary enough to be overlooked. I dialed her number. My heart raced. I wasn't sure Shayla was still using the same phone, but fortunately, she was. "Hello, Cameron? Oh my God, it's been so long. How are you?" Shayla's voice on the other end was as warm and sincere as ever. I forced my voice to tremble, desperate and fragile, exactly like a woman who had just been cast out of her marriage. "Shayla, I'm having some trouble. Could I stay with you for a few days?" Shayla didn't ask many questions. She answered decisively, like a true friend. "Of course, come right over, same address." "I'll be waiting." Shayla's apartment wasn't large, but it was neat and cozy. When she saw me soaked through and utterly exhausted, she gasped. She pulled me inside, gave me dry clothes to change into, and immediately made me a cup of hot ginger tea. "Oh my God, what happened? Where's Sterling?" I sat down, clutching the hot cup with both hands as if it were the only thing keeping me from falling apart. And then I told her. But I told only half the truth, the exact half Odessa wanted me to take into the world. I said Sterling and his sister had betrayed me, forced me to sign the divorce, thrown me out with nothing. I cried, and this time the tears weren't entirely fake. 7 years of sacrifice brushed aside did hurt, deeply, bitterly. I deliberately didn't mention Odessa. I didn't mention the enormous sum of money. I didn't mention the mansion. I had to guard that secret with my life. By the time I finished, Shayla was shaking with rage. She slammed the table and cursed Sterling's family without restraint. "Monsters! How can people be that vile?" Then she looked at me, her voice softening but firm. "Don't worry, Cameron. Stay here with me. I'm not rich, but you won't go hungry. Don't be afraid." Shayla's kindness struck straight at my heart. Not because she had money, but because she was genuine. And I knew. I had found the perfect hiding place. That night, using the new prepaid phone, I sent my mother-in-law a short message. "I'm safe." A few minutes later, Odessa replied, "Good. Stay calm." They've started making moves. And she was right. The next morning, as I was helping Shayla clean up, a social media post hit me like a slap. Amani, my sister-in-law, had posted a cryptic status on her personal page. "At last, the skies have cleared. Some burdens don't belong to us. Better to let go early and make room for better things." Along with it was a photo of Amani and Sterling sitting in an upscale cafe, both smiling brightly as if they had just shed a massive weight. The post quickly gathered hundreds of likes and comments. Their friends asked, "What are you celebrating?" "Sterling looks sharp." Amani didn't reply directly. She only dropped a few mocking, laughing emojis, which made people even more curious. As I read those lines, I understood immediately this was a public opinion test. They wanted to create the impression that our marriage ended peacefully, that I had left voluntarily while they were stepping into a brighter life. They needed that narrative to cover up the truth, that I had been thrown onto the street like a bag of trash. But their play wasn't over yet. That afternoon, Odessa sent me a short audio recording through the secret phone. I put on my earphones and pressed play. It was a dinner conversation between her and Sterling. "Mom, I've taken care of things with Cameron." She was sensible, signed willingly, and left. I gave her some money. I didn't want her to leave with nothing. Sterling's voice sounded proud, as if he had just performed some great act of charity. Odessa replied, her tone perfectly cold for the role. "Good. Get it over with quickly and focus on other matters. Amani introduced you to that woman, didn't she?" The modeling agency director sees the opportunity. A man can't be without a woman by his side. "Yes, Mom, I know. She's not bad." "Good family, beautiful, intelligent. She'll definitely help my career a lot." My heart froze as I listened. Less than a day after throwing me out, Sterling was already planning a future with another woman. And Odessa. Her performance sent chills down my spine in admiration. She guided the conversation expertly, letting Sterling reveal the most important details himself. A modeling agency director. So this was the life-changing opportunity Amani had mentioned. My marriage wasn't even officially over, and they were already clearing the way for a more suitable woman, higher status, someone who could elevate Sterling faster. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, forcing myself to remember one thing: stay calm. Now was not the time to scream. Now was the time to gather evidence. That night, I barely slept. The lines Odessa had written in her letter kept replaying in my mind. "Sterling has colluded with his mistress to siphon money from your own company, my company." Although I had handed day-to-day management to employees, major financial decisions and large transactions still required my approval. Sterling couldn't easily withdraw money unless there was an insider. Unless someone inside was helping him. And then a name flashed through my mind like lightning, sending a cold shiver down my spine. Maricel Knox, my chief accountant. Maricel was a quiet, meticulous woman who had worked with me for 5 years. I had trusted her completely. I handed over all accounting and financial matters to her. But recently, I had heard employees whisper that Maricel had bought a luxury condominium. With her salary, that was almost impossible. At the time, I had reassured myself, maybe her family has money. Now, everything felt far too suspicious. Immediately, I opened my laptop and logged into the company's internal management system. I went to the finance section and began reviewing every transaction from the past 6 months. My heart pounded. I scrolled through hundreds of expenses. At first, everything looked clean. Invoices, receipts, legitimate reasons, until I stopped at a series of payments with the same description. Marketing expenses for consulting firm North Star LLC. None of them were outrageously large, but they were significant, each over $100,000. recurring month after month. The strangest part was this: I had never heard of that name. And I had never approved any strategy involving it. I immediately opened my browser and searched for North Star LLC online. The results left me stunned. The company had been founded just 6 months earlier, and the legal representative was none other than Sterling DuPont. In that moment, everything clicked together like a horrifying puzzle. He had set up a shell company, then teamed up with Maricel to create fake service contracts. From there, he legitimized the transfer of money from my company into his own pocket, one payment at a time, regularly, quietly, so sophisticated that without close attention, no one would ever notice. A perfect scheme. An absolute cruelty. Sterling hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He was stealing the very money I had worked so hard to earn. I sat in front of the screen, fists clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. Rage surged through me like a tide, threatening to drown everything. But then I reminded myself, clearly, coldly, not yet. I had to stay calm. I needed more evidence, not just to expose him, but to make him pay before the law. And now, my play had gained a new antagonist. I knew one thing for certain. If I wanted to defeat Sterling and Amani, I would need a plan even more perfect than theirs. The shock of discovering that Sterling and Maricel were embezzling didn't make me lose my way. On the contrary, it felt like a hard kick straight into my survival instinct. I was no longer a naive lamb standing still, waiting to be carved up. Something in me was changing, colder, clearer, sharper. I turned into a she-wolf, wounded but not broken, retreating only to choose the right moment, and then biting so hard the enemy couldn't breathe. I understood this perfectly. I couldn't fight alone against a vicious alliance of my husband, my sister-in-law, and an employee I had once trusted completely. If I wanted to win, I needed allies who were stronger and more trustworthy. The first person I thought of was my mother. My mother, Gloria Waverly, is a retired teacher. She's friendly, kind, but never weak. She always taught me a woman may sacrifice for others, but she must never allow anyone to step on her dignity. The next morning, I took an early train to see her. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to show up directly, like a daughter who had just been knocked down by a storm and could only run back to the safest place in her life. My mother's small house in the suburbs was as peaceful and warm as ever. But when I appeared at the door looking worn down and hollow-eyed, my mother froze. Before I could say anything, I wrapped my arms tightly around her, holding on as if I let go, I would shatter right there on her doorstep. I told my mother everything, about being thrown out of the house, about Sterling and Amani's scheme, about the play directed by Odessa. I showed my mother Odessa's letter and the evidence about the shell company, North Star LLC. My mother listened in silence. Her face shifted from worry to shock and then settled into the most frightening expression of all, fury. When I finished, my mother didn't scream and she didn't sob loudly. She only squeezed my hand so tightly I could feel the trembling she was forcing down. "My child, you've endured far too much," she said, her voice catching. "From now on, you're not fighting alone anymore. I'm here." My mother's support exploded inside me like a silent bomb. Not loud, but it steadied me instantly. But I also knew love alone wouldn't win a legal war. I needed someone who understood the law, someone who could turn my evidence into a sharp weapon. "Mom, I need a good lawyer," I said. My mother nodded immediately. "I have an old friend. His name is Harrison Vale. He's a very well-known lawyer in Philadelphia, specializing in asset disputes and divorce. He's blunt, fair, and most of all, he hates scammers. Let me call him right now." That afternoon, I met Harrison Vale at his law office. He was a middle-aged man, tall, with a stance as solid as a pillar. His face didn't look intimidating. He simply had something that made people instinctively want to tell the truth: sharp eyes and a calm presence. I handed him everything. Odessa's letter, account statements, the information about North Star LLC registered under Sterling's name. He examined it carefully, turned pages, read, took notes. And then he simply nodded. His expression was so neutral that I started to feel impatient. "Mr. Harrison, what do you think? Is this enough to—" He cut me off, his voice firm. "This evidence is not only enough for you to win the divorce and recover all your assets, it's also enough to pursue criminal charges against Sterling for embezzlement and fraud." I stopped breathing. Even his sister Amani Tay and the accountant could be considered accomplices. He looked straight at me, his gaze turning serious. "But the question isn't whether we have enough evidence. The question is, how far do you want to take this?" He paused, then asked the sentence that made my blood run cold. "Do you want to send your husband to prison?" I went rigid. Send Sterling to prison? I'd never thought about that. No matter how ruthless he was still the man I had once loved, my husband for 7 years. A part of me still hesitated. Harrison Vale saw that silence and continued, slowly, but with the force of a hammer driving in a nail. "Cameron, I understand how you feel, but misplaced pity is cruelty towards yourself. That man has no feelings left for you. He betrayed you, stole the fruits of your labor. He doesn't deserve any consideration." He leaned forward toward me. "This fight isn't just about taking back what belongs to you. It's also about stopping them from deceiving other women." Those words lit up a dark corner inside me, the corner I had been avoiding. If I let Sterling off simply because I had once loved him, it would be no different from enabling evil. I lifted my head. For the first time in many days, my voice didn't shake. "I understand," I said. "I want everything handled according to the law. Whoever did wrong must face the consequences." "Good," Harrison Vale nodded with satisfaction. "Then we begin." He continued, laying out each step clearly. "For now, you keep playing your role. Act devastated, desperate. The more you do that, the more certain they'll be that they've won. Meanwhile, I'll discreetly gather more evidence, especially statements from company employees to build the case. We won't strike immediately. We'll wait for the perfect moment, when they least expect it, to deliver the final blow. At this point, if you're thinking, "Cameron, why not charge straight in and post all the evidence online and be done with it?" Trust me, I wanted to do exactly that too. But the problem is, if you strike a snake, you have to crush its head. If I acted too quickly, Sterling and Amani would have time to erase traces, shift blame, build a new story. And Maricel would manage to clean everything before anyone could touch it. So I chose the harder path. Silence. Silence so they would think I'd fallen. Silence so they would grow arrogant. Silence so they would walk by their own hands into the noose without knowing it. And do you know what the most terrifying part of this kind of plan is? It isn't the danger, it's that every day you have to act like a loser while inside you're holding a knife. Leaving the law office, I felt as if I had a new spine. I had a plan, a strategy. I was no longer a boat drifting aimlessly in the ocean. I had a lighthouse and an experienced captain. I returned to Shayla's apartment and continued my role. I made myself look more fragile. I ate less, slept less, spent the whole day staring blankly into space. Shayla looked at me with pity, constantly trying to encourage me. I knew she was sincere. And because of that, I couldn't tell her the truth. The fewer people who knew about the play, the safer it was. This plan was too risky, and I had to play the role of a perfectly shattered woman. Do you think you could do that? Pretend to be weak while preparing a counterstrike inside? Share your thoughts, okay? While I stayed silent, Sterling and Amani were celebrating their victory elsewhere. Odessa kept updating me. Sterling publicly revealed his relationship with the model. He took her shopping to upscale restaurants without a trace of shame. Amani wouldn't stop showing off on social media, designer clothes, luxury trips, all sponsored by her beloved brother. They were drunk on success, unaware that an invisible net was slowly tightening around them. My play continued. Every day I acted like a failed, miserable woman with nothing left to cling to. I didn't contact Sterling. I didn't fight back. I didn't reveal a single sign. My silence made them completely drop their guard. They believed I had accepted my fate. And yes, that was exactly what I wanted them to believe. I needed them to be certain of victory. I needed them arrogant, so that when I struck, they wouldn't have time to react. One night, while I was alone in my room, the secret phone vibrated. A message from Odessa. Amani is about to celebrate her birthday. She wants to throw a huge party at the most luxurious hotel in the city to introduce her new boyfriend and show off her status. Sterling will pay for everything. A flash of light ignited in my mind. A huge party. Hundreds of guests, friends and business partners of Sterling and Amani. A perfect stage to bring the curtain down. I smiled in the darkness. A smile so cold that even I found it unfamiliar. Thank you, Amani, for giving me such a wonderful opportunity. Your birthday party will definitely become an unforgettable memory. The plan for Amani's special birthday gift was formed in secret between Harrison Vale and me. Time was tight, only 2 weeks left. But with what we had, I knew for sure we could create an earthquake. First, we needed to confirm the party details. I called Odessa, keeping my voice weak and desperate as usual. Mom, I heard this weekend is Amani's birthday. Odessa's voice on the other end was as cold as ever, but I could hear an undercurrent of satisfaction. That's right, she's planning a big party. She invited hundreds of people to the Ritz-Carlton. Her boyfriend comes from a good family. She has to make a good impression. Sterling is handling everything from A to Z. I lowered my voice, pretending to choke up. Can I come, Mom? After all, she's still my sister-in-law. Odessa gave a dry laugh. What would you come for? So everyone can stare and whisper, stay home and leave us in peace. I hung up and smiled. The more they didn't want me there, the more powerful my presence would be. Meanwhile, Harrison Vale began to move. He sent an official request to my company demanding, on my behalf as management, meaning me, that the company cooperate by providing all accounting books and invoices from last year for the divorce asset division. Of course, this was only a diversionary strike, but it aimed straight at Maricel. The moment the request arrived, I called an emergency meeting and invited Maricel and the other department heads. I played the role of a weak boss, anxious and helpless to the point that even I would have found myself pitiful from the outside. I said my husband's lawyer was pressuring me. They suspected there were financial irregularities in the company, and I asked Maricel to prepare all the necessary documents. Maricel, please check everything carefully, I said, looking straight into her eyes, my voice almost pleading. I trust you completely, but Sterling's lawyer is very aggressive. If they find any mistake, it won't just be me. The whole company will be in trouble. Maricel tensed exactly as I expected, but she tried to stay calm. She nodded, promising to check everything. I knew. Right after the meeting, she would inform Sterling, and that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted them scared. I wanted them to think the scheme was about to be discovered. Because when the guilty panic, they make more mistakes with their own hands. That night, Odessa sent me another recording. This time it was a tense phone call between Sterling and Maricel. What do you mean? My wife's lawyer wants to audit the books. Maricel's voice trembled. We'll be ruined if they discover the contracts with North Star LLC. Sterling replied, worried as well, but trying to reassure her. Calm down. All the documents are legal. You just need to say those were real campaigns. Cameron doesn't understand anything about marketing. What can she possibly check? Then he lowered his voice, cold as a blade. Listen, do what I say. Under the pretense of year-end cleanup, destroy all hard copy duplicates of those contracts and delete the data from the computer too. Leave no trace. Do it. I'll pay you well after it's done. The recording ended. I sat still, nausea rising in my throat. They weren't just thieves. Now they were planning to destroy evidence, but they had no idea. Every step they took was leaving footprints, and those footprints were being recorded clearly. Harrison Vale listened and only smiled. "Excellent," he said. "Destroying evidence is an extremely valuable aggravating factor in court." He looked at me, his voice firm as a stamped seal. Now, we just need to wait for the party." In the days that followed, I continued playing the role of a broken woman. Under the pretense of health issues, I didn't go to the company. I left everything to the department heads, deliberately creating a gap large enough for Maricel Knox to believe she could manipulate everything without anyone noticing. And I knew for sure Maricel was taking full advantage of that opportunity. But there was one thing Sterling and Maricel had no idea about. In the shadows, I had installed remote data recovery software on the company's server. Any deletion or change Maricel made was recorded. Every time she deleted a file, it didn't disappear. It simply moved house into my hidden system, backed up discreetly, silently, and completely. Meanwhile, Sterling DuPont and Imani DuPont were busy preparing their party of the century. They thought it was a birthday party, but I knew clearly it was a public trial where all their crimes would be exposed under blinding lights in front of the very people they most wanted to impress. And I, too, began preparing for my appearance. I didn't need to buy new clothes. I didn't need glamorous makeup to compete with anyone. My weapon had never been beauty. My weapon was the truth. All I needed was the mental preparation to keep my mind ice cold, to face the people who had crushed my life without letting my hands shake even once. I contacted a few close friends, people who had been beside me and Sterling since the early days, and invited them to a special event on Saturday night at the Ritz-Carlton, Philadelphia. I didn't give details. I sent only one line. "Come, you'll get to watch a play, a very interesting one." The day of the party finally arrived. I stood before the mirror, staring at myself for a long time. I was no longer the exhausted, hollow-eyed Cameron from those rainy days. I had pulled back the bearing of a businesswoman who once stood firm in the marketplace, confident, decisive, no longer begging anyone for pity. I chose a simple but elegant black dress, hair in a high bun, dark red lipstick, not to seduce but to remind myself tonight was a night of power. This wasn't the outfit of a victim. This was the armor of a warrior. My mother, Gloria Waverly, took my hand. Her gaze was so steady that I felt my heart shake less. "Go, my child." "It's time to bring the curtain down." I nodded and took a deep breath. Tonight, Philadelphia would not sleep. The Ritz-Carlton that night was so dazzling it almost didn't feel real. The main lobby was decorated with fresh flowers, balloons, and cascading crystal displays that scattered light onto the marble floor. Soft music blended with laughter, the gentle clink of glasses, and layers of expensive perfume hanging in the air. Imani, in a custom-designed rose quartz evening gown covered in sequins, stood at the entrance greeting guests. Beautiful, arrogant, radiant like a princess savoring her throne. Beside her was Sterling, in a refined white suit, holding hands with a young, beautiful model he openly introduced as his new girlfriend. They looked like a perfect couple, happy, successful, complete. From a distance, anyone would think they were the embodiment of high life and the peak. But I saw something else. I saw an abyss opening right beneath their feet. I didn't enter the lobby right away. Together with Harrison Vale and two notaries in plain clothes, I sat in a cafe on the ground floor, watching quietly like outsiders. In another discreet corner, Odessa DuPont had also arrived. She continued her role as a simple woman from a small town, dressed plainly, sitting quietly, without showing off. But I knew those sharp eyes were tracking every movement in the lobby, like an old hawk that had seen every trick in life. According to the plan, we waited until exactly 8 p.m., when the party was fully underway, when the guest count was at its fullest, when arrogance had risen to its highest point. That would be the moment to pull the curtain. I know someone will ask, "Cameron, weren't you afraid? Walking in there alone among hundreds of people, in front of Sterling and Amani, weren't you afraid they would do something to you?" Of course I was afraid. I was so afraid that right then in the cafe I could hear my heartbeat pounding inside my ears. But I was more afraid of something else. I was afraid I would soften again. I was afraid that the moment I saw Sterling, 7 years of memories would drag me back. I was afraid that one look, one fake apology, would make me hesitate. And I understood. If I hesitated even once, they would escape. So I reminded myself of one sentence, just one. Today, I'm not here to cry. I'm here to end this. At exactly 8 p.m., after Amani's opening speech, a speech full of boasting about her personal success and the support of her wonderful brother, the MC invited everyone to look up at the big screen to watch a video of her most memorable moments from the past year. And that was my moment. I stood up, adjusted my black dress, took a deep breath, then walked into the lobby with Harrison Vale and the two notaries. My presence instantly pulled every gaze like a magnet drawing iron. The music slowed. Conversation thinned. Whispers spread like waves. Everyone knew who I was. The useless, barren wife who had just been abandoned by her husband. They looked at me with every kind of expression. Curiosity, pity, and even contempt. On the stage, Sterling and Amani froze. The smiles vanished from their lips as if someone had slapped them. Amani went from radiant to pale. Sterling stammered, as if someone were squeezing his throat. "Cameron, what are you doing here?" I didn't answer him. I only smiled. A wide, radiant, terrifyingly calm smile, and walked straight onto the stage, reaching out to take the microphone from the bewildered MC. "Sorry to interrupt the party." My voice was clear, strong, ringing through the hall. "I am Cameron DuPont, the lawful wife of Mr. Sterling DuPont." I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the audience, stopping on familiar faces. Friends, partners who had worked with me, people who had believed I was Sterling's support system. Today is a happy day for my sister-in-law. And I also have a small gift. I tilted my head, my smile unchanged. A special video for her and for her beloved brother. Consider it my congratulations for the new chapter in the lives of the two of you. Then I signaled the video technician, the one Harrison had instructed in advance. The lights in the hall dimmed, and leaving only the glow of the giant screen. The video began. Not glamorous photos of Amani, but a picture of their old family house in the countryside before it was renovated, accompanied by the words, "This is where the story begins." Then bank statements appeared one by one, enlarged clearly. Sender, Cameron DuPont, recipient Sterling DuPont and Amani DuPont, with amounts reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. A caption appeared, "Money to build a house for the husband's parents. Money for 4 years of the sister-in-law's studies in London, all from a parasitic wife." The entire hall began to stir. The whispers grew thicker. A few "oh my God" slipped out before people could stop themselves. Sterling and Amani's faces went from ghostly white to a sickly purple. The video continued. Screenshots of transactions between my company and Sterling's shell company, North Star LLC, fake contracts. Fraudulent invoices. Everything so clear, no one could pretend they didn't see it. The next line hit like a hammer, and this is how a wonderful husband repays her. He embezzled nearly $1 million from his wife's money to support a mistress. The screen shifted to a series of photos of Sterling and the model embracing, intimate, from luxury restaurants to hotels. Sterling screamed like a madman, "Turn that off! Turn that garbage off! Right now!" He lunged toward the stage. but Harrison Vale and the two notaries immediately blocked him. Too late. The video kept playing. This time, it was the recording of the conversation between Sterling and Maricel where they discussed destroying evidence. Delete everything so there won't be any trace left. The voices echoed through the hall, clear, naked, with no way back. The hall exploded. Boos, curses, sounds of disgust from the very people who had raised their glasses to congratulate them just minutes earlier. The model, Sterling's new girlfriend, stood frozen. Her face was pale as paper. She looked at Sterling as if he were a stranger, a man she had just realized she was only a pawn to. The video ended with the image of the divorce papers Sterling had once thrown in my face, along with the pathetic alimony and the demand, "You will leave with nothing." The final line appeared on the screen like a verdict. Justice may come late, but it always comes. The lights came back on. Chaos erupted. Amani shrieked and sobbed. Her crying no longer had any princess in it, only the panic of someone whose mask had just been ripped off in front of a crowd. Guests jeered, furious because they felt deceived. Reporters, the ones we had notified in advance, surged forward, cameras raised, firing questions like bullets. "Mr. Carter, how do you explain this evidence?" "Ms. Carter, did you know about your brother's fraudulent activities?" The grand birthday party turned into a public trial, a tragic farce where the two main characters, Sterling and Amani, were judged by the very people they most wanted to impress. Amid the chaos, I calmly set the microphone down. Then I stepped off the stage. At the edge of the hall, Odessa was waiting for me. She took my hand. Her eyes were a mixture of compassion and pride. "Come on, my child, the play is over." I nodded. I left the hall with Odessa, leaving behind the ashes of lies and greed. I didn't need to look back. I knew that from tonight onward, Sterling and Amani's lives would never be the same again. The storm I created at the Ritz-Carlton spread faster than I ever imagined. That very night, the birthday gift video and the chaotic recording from the party flooded social media like wildfire. In a single night, Sterling went from a successful business executive to a condemned fraud. Amani went from a proud princess, outstanding student, to an ungrateful traitor living off her sister-in-law's sacrifices. Their scandal became the hottest topic on every forum, in every conversation. The company stock tied to Sterling's work plunged. Partners canceled contracts. Friends and colleagues turned their backs. In one single night, they lost everything. Careers, reputations, relationships they had once bragged about with their heads held high. The next morning, police opened an official investigation. With the evidence from the party and my report, Sterling and Maricel were summoned for questioning. A travel ban was imposed immediately, shattering any escape plan they might have considered. While they were being pulled under, Odessa and I found a strange kind of peace. After that DTE, we didn't return to Shayla's apartment or my mother's house. Odessa arranged a short trip to a resort in the Poconos Mountains. She said we needed to avoid the eye of the storm, letting the law and public opinion do the remaining work. And most importantly, I needed rest, to heal the deep wounds in my soul. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. I walked along the lakeshore, listening to the water, breathing in the fresh mountain air. I didn't have to worry. I didn't have to calculate. I didn't have to perform. I could be myself. Odessa seemed to have set down a burden as well. She no longer looked harsh and irritable. She laughed more, talked more. She told me about her youth, the hardships and failures she had once overcome, and I began to understand. Behind the cruel shell she had built was a woman who had been hurt and who had once had to fight alone. One evening, as we sat on the balcony overlooking the lake, Odessa suddenly said, "My child, I'm sorry." Her voice turned rough. "I was wrong to treat you that way. I was selfish. I thought only about my own children and forgot that you are also my daughter." I took her wrinkled but warm hand. "I don't blame you, I understand." It's all over now. No, Odessa shook her head, her gaze turning serious. It's not over. I have to make it up to you, and not just with money, but with something more. I didn't understand what she meant. Not until we returned to Philadelphia. Odessa brought me to a luxurious office building in Chestnut Hill. She took me up to the top floor, then opened the door to a large, bright, cool-toned office where a brass plaque was mounted neatly. Office of the President, Westwood Real Estate Group. I stood frozen. Westwood was one of the largest real estate conglomerates in the country, a formidable rival of Sterling's old company. I turned to Odessa, my voice almost failing me. This is your company? Odessa looked at me, calm but proud. More precisely, this is the company your grandfather left to me, and I've managed it in secret all these years, without anyone knowing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mother-in-law, the woman I had thought was just a simple housewife, was, in fact, the chairwoman of an empire. Why did you hide this? I asked. Odessa looked out through the glass, her eyes distant. Because I wanted to test people, my child. I wanted to see how my children would treat me if I had nothing, and I got my answer. They only cared about my money, my assets. Odessa turned back to me, her eyes full of trust. Only you, Cameron. Only you treated me with a sincere heart, even when you thought I was just a grumpy old woman with nothing to give. She held my hand, her voice slow but certain. Cameron, I'm old now. I don't have the strength to keep going. I want you to replace me. That offer struck like lightning. Me, the president of Westwood Group? I stammered. But I don't have experience in real estate. Odessa smiled, strangely gentle. Business is business, my child. The field doesn't matter. If you could build a chain of stores from zero, there's no reason you can't lead this group. Besides, you're not alone. You'll have me, and the most loyal team by your side. I looked into Odessa's eyes. I understood this wasn't merely an offer. It was a handover, absolute trust. I was no longer the wife who had been abandoned, no longer a pitiful victim. I had a chance to start again, and even build something bigger, brighter than anything I had ever had. I took a deep breath. Yes, I said firmly, I won't let you down. That day, when I walked out of the Westwood building in Chestnut Hill, I knew my life had turned a new page, a page full of challenges, but also full of promise. I would live not only for myself, but to live worthy of Odessa's trust and build a better future. And I knew, somewhere when Sterling and Imani heard this news, they would regret it to the marrow. But it was too late. They themselves had destroyed everything they had. The news that Cameron DuPont, the woman once abandoned in Sterling Carter's scandal, had suddenly become the new chairwoman of Westwood Group overnight, sent a shockwave even bigger than the chaos at the hotel. Philadelphia's business world practically held its breath. No one could believe that the woman they had once looked at with pity, even contempt, the useless parasitic wife, was now sitting in a seat of power that countless people dreamed of their entire lives without ever touching. Newspapers and news portals devoted full pages to writing about me, but this time it wasn't mocking lines or pity. This time it was admiration mixed with confusion. They called me the mysterious businesswoman. They called me a phoenix rising from the ashes. My face appeared on the covers of prestigious business magazines. My story became an inspiration for millions of women. But I didn't dwell on that flattery. I understood perfectly. The spotlight only illuminates the surface. And the reality behind it is always a battle. Taking over leadership of a conglomerate like Westwood wasn't as beautiful as a magazine cover photo. I had to learn again from the beginning, prove myself step by step, work 100 times, no, 1,000 times harder, just to make the skeptics stop looking at me like a lucky break. I threw myself into work like a moth flying into a flame. Daytime, meetings, project reviews, problem solving. Nighttime, Financial reports, real estate market materials, endless rows of numbers that left my eyes aching. Odessa DuPont became my best advisor. She didn't interfere directly in management, but every sentence she spoke was like a guiding compass. She taught me how to read people, how to negotiate, how to make bold decisions without being reckless. She showed me where the traps were before I could even step into them. Step by step, I proved my worth. Under my leadership, Westwood not only didn't wobble, it grew powerfully. I rolled out new business strategies, bold, clear, effective. New projects launched successfully and brought in enormous profits. Shareholders who had once doubted me had no choice but to trust me. While I was buried in work, the trial of Sterling and his accomplices also reached its conclusion. With undeniable evidence and public outrage, the court handed down a harsh verdict. Sterling Carter was sentenced to 15 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. Maricel Knox, the chief accountant, received 7 years for aiding and abetting. Amani, though not directly involved in the embezzlement, was still sentenced to 3 years of probation for her role in incitement and benefiting from it, and was ordered to repay all the money she had spent. I did not attend the trial. I didn't want to see their defeated faces anymore. To me, every account had already been settled that night at the hotel. People said Sterling screamed and cursed when he heard the sentence. He blamed me and Odessa for everything, as if we were the ones who had pushed him into wrongdoing, and Amani collapsed right there in the courtroom. Their family fell apart completely. Their parents, watching both children become entangled in legal trouble, were forced to sell their house back home to pay attorney fees, but in the end, it was still useless. They paid an unimaginably high price for their own greed and blindness. If the story ended here, perhaps many people would say, "That's it. Evil got what it deserved." The good person won. But real life doesn't end neatly like a movie finale, because after justice has spoken its final word, there is still something harder than winning in court. That is, how do you keep living with what happened? And more importantly, can you let go? I had won. I had everything, but my heart was only then beginning to enter its own courtroom. One afternoon, as I was getting ready to leave the office, my secretary told me I had a call from the prison. I froze. The name that appeared was Sterling. I hesitated for a few seconds. Then I picked up. "Cameron, it's me." His voice was tired, dry, as if every word had to be dragged up from his throat. "Hello," I replied calmly. "Is there something specific you're calling about?" "No, Mal. Nothing special," Sterling said, like someone clinging to a final thread. "I just wanted to apologize to you. One more time. I know it's too late, but I truly regret it. In here, I have a lot of time to think, and I was wrong. Wrong in a way that can't be forgiven." He paused, his voice tightening. "I destroyed my own happiness. I lost the best woman in the world." I listened in silence. The rage no longer flared the way it used to. There was only a cold calm. Sterling continued, his voice even smaller. "I also feel guilty toward Mom. I was a terrible son. I wasn't there when she needed me the most. If you can, please take care of her in my place, and my parents too. They're old now. They've endured too much." He seemed to want to say more, but I cut him off. "You don't need to say anything else," I said clearly. "I will take care of your parents. Focus on reforming yourself." "That's the best way to make amends." I hung up. I realized I was no longer angry. Only a little pity remained. He had paid the price, and that price was not cheap. A few days later, I went to the old neighborhood, where Sterling's parents lived. After the scandal, they had to sell everything and return to their run-down old house. Peeling wooden doors, the damp smell in the air, and the sense of poverty wasn't only in the furniture, it was in people's eyes. I knocked. Sterling's mother opened the door. She froze when she saw me, shock and shame in her eyes. She had aged visibly. The old arrogance and bitterness were gone. "Cameron, what are you doing here?" she stammered. "I came to visit you," I smiled. A smile without resentment. I stepped inside. The small house was not tidy. Sterling's father lay on a folding bed. After a stroke, he was half paralyzed. When he saw me, he tried to lift himself up, eyes reddening. I set a fruit basket and an envelope on the table. "I brought you both a few things," I said. "This is some money to help with living expenses. I've also contacted a good rehabilitation center. They'll come to the house to help Dad with exercises." Sterling's mother burst into tears. These tears weren't to pressure anyone. They were tears of belated regret. "Cameron, we treated you so terribly. We don't deserve this." "The past is over," I said sincerely. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Sterling. After all, he was still my husband for 7 years. And I'm also doing it for myself. I don't want to live with hatred." I left with a lighter heart. I understood something. Forgiveness doesn't just free other people. Forgiveness is how you remove the shackle from your own neck. 1 year after my marriage collapsed, my small family welcomed a new member, a beautiful little boy who looked exactly like... Wait. I'm getting ahead of the story. Let me step back a little. One morning, as I was reviewing reports in my office, my secretary walked in, looking hesitant. "Madam Chairwoman, there is someone named Amani DuPont asking to see you." I stiffened. It had been a long time since I'd heard that name. After the scandal, Amani disappeared, cut off contact, as if she had never existed. Why was she looking for me now? "Let her in," I replied calmly. I wanted to see what Amani could possibly want. Amani walked in. And I almost didn't recognize her. She no longer had the modern, confident look of a princess. She was gaunt, her face hollow, eyes sunken with exhaustion and fear. The suit she wore was worn out, stripped of the sparkle that once fed her pride. Amani lowered her head, not daring to look me in the eye. "Cameron, she mumbled. "Sit down," I pointed to the chair. "What do you want?" Amani hesitated, then suddenly dropped to her knees in front of me and broke down crying. "Cameron, I'm sorry. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I regret it so much. I'm begging you, please save me." I was stunned by that action. I stood up immediately. "Get up," I said clearly. "If you have something to say it properly. I don't want to see this." After a while, Amani finally calmed down and told me everything. After Sterling's scandal, his mistress, the model, quickly fled with a large sum of money Sterling had embezzled. She escaped abroad, leaving Amani alone to face the consequences. Amani was implicated as an accomplice. Even though her sentence was lighter than Sterling's and Maricel's, her reputation in financial circles was completely destroyed. No company wanted to hire her. She lived like an outcast, stared at with contempt. "I've lost everything, Cameron," Amani sobbed. "My career, my friends, my honor. There's nothing left. For months I've been doing menial jobs just to survive. I can't take it anymore. Give me one chance to rebuild. I swear I'll do everything to make up for it." She looked at me with pleading eyes, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. I stayed silent. In my head, there was only one question. Should I forgive someone who stabbed me in the back? But then I suddenly saw in Amani a reflection of myself from the past, the same look of a woman who had lost everything, standing at rock bottom in despair. If Odessa hadn't been there that day, maybe I wouldn't have been able to stand up again either. I looked at Amani for a long time, then said, "Stand up." My voice softened slightly. "I don't want to drown in the past. Anyone can make mistakes. What matters is knowing regret." Amani looked up, eyes widening with hope. "You mean, I'm not saying I forgive you," I cut her off. "Betrayal can't be erased that easily. But I can give you a chance." I took a business card, then wrote an address on it. "This is the address of a social center funded by Westwood Group. They're looking for an accountant. It's not glamorous. The salary isn't high, but it's enough for you to start over. Go there and use your ability to help people who need it. Consider that a way to correct your mistakes." Amani took the card, her hands trembling. She couldn't say a word, only lowered her head. Tears of regret fell continuously. When Amani left, I watched her hunched back and felt relieved. I suddenly realized the sweetest revenge isn't making your enemy suffer. It's having enough mercy to leave them a way out, so they have to live with their own conscience. And more importantly, turning the pain of the past into something meaningful to help others. That day, I truly understood a lesson about forgiveness. After giving Amani a chance, my life seemed to enter a new chapter, lighter and more peaceful. The burden of the past felt as if it had been lifted. I focused on work and on caring for Odessa. Under my leadership, Westwood strengthened its position. We didn't just build luxurious projects, we also led social initiatives. I established the Sunflower Foundation myself, supporting hundreds of women entrepreneurs, creating a powerful wave of empowerment and independence for women. I became a model, a source of inspiration, but deep down, there was still an emptiness. I had a career, I had money, I had fame. But I didn't have a real home. The large mansion, even with Odessa by my side, sometimes still felt so empty it turned cold to the bone. I longed for a child, a small life to love, so my life could have meaning in another way. But after everything, I no longer believed in love. I didn't want to place my life in a man's hands again. I once thought about adoption, until Odessa had a different idea. One evening, while we were watching a romantic movie, Odessa suddenly asked, "Cameron, have you thought about remarrying?" I startled. "Mom, what are you saying? No, I haven't thought about that." "Why?" Odessa looked at me gently. "You're still young, you're beautiful, intelligent, you deserve happiness, you deserve to have a man by your side who loves you and protects you. Not all men are like Sterling." I took a breath, then confessed the truest thing. "I'm afraid, Mom. I'm afraid of being deceived again, afraid of being hurt." Odessa held my hand warm and steady. "I understand. But you can't keep your heart closed forever just because of one bad experience. Give yourself a chance, and also give someone else a chance. There's a man I want you to meet. He's a very good man." I had never imagined Odessa, my mother-in-law, would become a matchmaker. The man she introduced was Dr. Desmond Shaw, the son of her late best friend. He was a pediatrician 5 years older than me, divorced, raising his young daughter alone. I had met him a few times at family gatherings. My impression, a quiet man, not talkative, with a gentle smile and warm eyes. At Odessa's urging, Dr. Desmond and I began seeing each other. At first, it was just coffee, ordinary conversations. But then, very slowly, I realized I was drawn to his sincerity. He didn't use flowery words. No expensive gifts. He simply showed up when I was tired. He listened to me, without judging, without prying too much, just being there. He also told me about his old marriage, about the pain and pressure of raising his daughter alone. With him, I felt peace. I didn't have to force myself to be strong. I didn't have to hide my wounds. He loved the real Cameron, both strengths and weaknesses. And then I met Nyla, his daughter, a sweet, affectionate little girl who quickly came to like me. Every weekend, we went to the park, to the movies for ice cream. Those small things warmed my heart in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Looking at Nyla's clear, innocent smile, I saw what I wanted most, to be a mother. One afternoon at the park, Nyla ran over to hug me, then looked up and asked in a naive voice, "Auntie Cameron, can I call you Mom?" My breath caught. Tears flooded my eyes. I hugged Nyla tightly and nodded. "Of course, my love." Dr. Desmond stood nearby, his eyes lighting up, so moved that his lips trembled slightly. He walked over, then knelt down. He took out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple but refined diamond ring. Cameron, will you marry me? He asked, his voice warm and sincere. I won't promise you material wealth because you already have that. But I promise you what you've always been searching for. A family, a real home, a place with me, with Nyla, and with unconditional love. I looked at them. A good man, a child who was wrapping herself around my heart, and I realized I no longer had a reason to run. I nodded, without hesitation. I held out my hand for him to slide the ring onto my finger. A tear of happiness rolled down my cheek. After so many storms, I had finally found a safe harbor. Our wedding was simple but warm on the shores of Cape May. No luxury, no showiness, just family and our closest friends. My mother and my mother-in-law stood side by side, holding each other's hands tightly, radiant smiles on the faces of two women who had weathered far too many storms. Nyla, in a white princess dress, scattered flower petals along the aisle. An innocent, joyful little girl, happy to be the one leading her own parents down the path. In that moment, I understood. Some weddings don't need hundreds of guests, only enough love. Life after marriage with Desmond felt like a sweet dream. I once thought I no longer deserved to dream. A year later, we welcomed baby Marcus, a bright, handsome boy whose face looked exactly like his father's. The mansion, which had once felt so large it was empty, was now always filled with the laughter of two children. Nyla became a wonderful big sister, gentle, loving her little brother with all her tender young heart. I continued to lead Westwood Group, but I learned how to balance. I no longer let work swallow my entire life. I understood that no success, no matter how great, could ever replace the happiness of a peaceful home. The Sunflower Foundation kept growing, reaching beyond national borders, becoming a globally influential organization that helped thousands of women reclaim their voices, their independence, and their own worth. At a certain point, I passed the torch to the next generation and stepped back with serenity. Sometimes, I still heard news about Sterling. He was granted parole after a few years and lived quietly in a small town. He never contacted me again, and I never went looking for him. Each of us had chosen our own path to pay the price and keep living. Amani changed too. She got married, left her old ambitions behind, and found her own way. Not glamorous, but enough to stand tall. My mother-in-law left us a few years later in complete peace. Before she closed her eyes, she held my hand and said, her voice weak but clear, "Cameron, I don't regret choosing you. You did more than I ever dared to dream." Those words stayed with me forever. Many years passed. When my hair had turned gray, I sat on the porch and told my grandchildren my story. The story of a woman who once fell to the deepest despair, then slowly stood up again, walked through storms, and reached happiness. "Grandma," my oldest granddaughter said, eyes shining, "when I grow up, I want to become someone like you." I smiled and gently brushed her soft hair. "You don't have to be like Grandma," I said softly. "You only need to be yourself. Live honestly, live kindly, and never let anyone trample on your dignity." I looked out at the garden blooming brilliantly. The wind carried the sweet fragrance of grass and flowers and of memories. My life had been a long journey, full of highs and lows, tears and loss, but also filled with so much love. And I regret nothing, because everything that happened, both pain and happiness, helped shape who I am today, a Cameron who found happiness in the peace within her own soul. My story will not end here. It continues to live in my children, in my grandchildren, and in every woman the Sunflower Foundation has touched and will continue to touch. An immortal song of resilience, of faith, and of the beauty of life. A song called The Rebirth of the Phoenix. We have just listened together to the story of a strong woman. I am grateful to her for sharing her courage. If you were in her position, would you have the courage to make those difficult decisions? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every comment and always try to respond. Thank you for being here with me. See you in the next story.